Malay Kadahunag and welcome to my video. Today, we're gonna be talking about literary criticism, and we're gonna do a brief discussion about the difference between literary criticism and literary theory. Without further ado, let's proceed to our main discussion. Literary criticism is the name given to works written by an expert who analyze an author's work. It is a term refers to those who express their opinion and ideas about a certain literature. It could be a positive or a negative feedback about the piece. Furthermore, literary criticism doesn't mean to criticize as in to complain or to disapprove. Rather, it is a way of expressing and giving your analysis, opinion, and interpretation. Literary criticism is often referred to as secondary source. Indeed, it is. It is not original since it is only the result of your analysis and interpretation based upon the original literature. Literary criticism is the study of literature. It is a way of looking deeper at the literature through discussing, interpreting, analyzing, and evaluating, which includes classifying the genre, analyzing the structure, and judging the value. Since things do really look different from different angles and views, all in all, literary criticism is all about perspective. Therefore, literary criticism asks what literature is, what it does, and what it is worth. Now, let's proceed to the difference between literary theory and literary criticism. Today, we will answer the question, what is the difference between literary theory and literary criticism? Generally speaking, literary criticism denotes an action. It involves an act of interpreting or an act of interpretation without taking theory and idea into an account. Whereas, literary theory denotes an idea, an abstract, a set of rules or principles. A simple approach to think about literary theory is that these concepts serve as diverse glasses through which critics perceive and discuss art, literature, and even civilization. These many lenses enable critics to evaluate works of art depending on assumption. The many lenses also enable reviewers to concentrate on specific feature of work that they deem noteworthy. Furthermore, literary theory is the method or the tools that we use to attempt to understand literature. Let's just all remember that the basic distinction between literary theory and literary criticism is that literary theory denotes an abstract idea and set of rules, while literary criticism denotes an action.
Hello, good day everyone. So now that we already have basic understanding of what literary criticism is, let us move on to the next topic, which my partner and I will be going to discuss today. The topic that we are going to learn is about the historical background of literary criticism. So the term criticism derives from the Greek term criticus, that means a judge of literature, which was used in 4th century BC. And in 2nd century AD, its place was taken by the term criticus, aimed at interpretation of texts and words, and lastly, improvement of works of writers in Greek or Latin. So literary criticism simply started in Greek criticism. The most influential writer are Aristotle and Plato. So who is Aristotle? Aristotle was a Greek critic from Greece. He was a brilliant student of Plato, and his major contribution to the literary criticism is his great book entitled Poetics. So Aristotle Poetics is mostly devoted to drama because Aristotle divides the art of poetry into verse, including epic poem, dialectical, tragedy, and comedy. The next one is Plato. Plato is the great disciple of Socrates, the teacher of Aristotle. He wrote the Republic, and Plato's theories of literary are scarcely literary criticism because Plato was the first critic who examined poetry as a part of his moral philosophy. Plato was basically a moral philosopher and not a literary critic. Plato's primary concentration was to induce moral values in the society and to seek the ultimate truth. So when he examined the poetry, his tools is rather moral and not aesthetic. So after the literary criticism in Greece, it goes in group with the famous critic writer Horace, who wrote the most influential poem entitled Arts of Poetica, or it means the art of poetry. So the real name of Horace was Quintus Horatius Flaccus. So after the criticism in Rome, it goes in England. It helped to aid their literature. So George Pottenham is one of the English critics writer in that time. So he wrote the book of the art of English poesy. So the next critic writers in English time was Philip Sidney. He was an English poet, courtier, scholar, and soldier who is remembered as one of the most prominent figures of the Elizabeth age. He wrote The Apology for Poetry. Literary critics' works are important in that time because it is a detailed examination of the art of poetry and the discussion of the state of English poetry at that time. For nearly 100 years, the major critical works to appear tended to reinforce the classical tradition and rules. Some of the main works were Ben Jonson, who wrote The Timber or Discovery in 1640. Next is Pierre Cornell, who wrote Discourse in 1660. Next is Boileau L. at Potiki in 1673. So in English, Dryden used it in the modern sense in preface to state the Innocents in 1677. He writes the criticism as it was meant a standard of judging.
In continuation to historical background of criticism, in 18th century, the Italian critic and philosopher Giambattista Vico, he had pioneered the historical approach to literature. Historicism, it is a theory, doctrine, or style that emphasizes the importance of history, and it constantly changed. Thus, we cannot take hold of the theory and judge it according to the past status it had. And now let's go to Neoclassicism. Neoclassicism is the revival of a classical style or treatment in art, literature, architecture, or music. It is a growing interest in literary works other than those of Greece and Rome, and in a wider range of literary viewpoints concerning the language to be utilized as well as the faculties or creativity and imagination and the writer's method. In 19th century, many critical theories had begun to proliferate and grow, and one of those is aestheticism. It was an art movement in the late 19th century which privileged the aesthetic value of literature, music, and arts. In all, literary criticism is a comparison, analysis, interpretation, and evaluation of the works of literature. And today, the term literary criticism aims at the study of works of literature with emphasis of their evaluation.
Good day everyone, I am Janus Adga and welcome to my video. Today, we are gonna talking about the nature of criticism. The nature of criticism. To further explain the nature of criticism, let us move on to its definition wherein literary criticism is the exercise of judgment on works of literature. Also, it is used to examine the merits and demerits and finally to evaluate the artistic work. It is the function of criticism. Those literary criticism is the study, discussion, evaluation, and interpretation of literature. Criticism and creation. To some people, criticism appears to be secondary, parasitic, and inferior to creation. Indication that having to criticize someone's literary works lower its quality since critics are only to interpret what they have analyzed and understood, and the original thoughts and views stays within the author's intention on his or her work. However, it does not indicate that critics' job is to disregard the real meaning of a literary work to make it less important, but instead it is to further examine and determine its literary means to find out what reason and styles are used during its creation to be able to examine and have some other views that could help the readers. Furthermore, it is stated that the creative artist is personal and subjective, whereas the critic is impersonal, dispassionate, and detached. Meaning to say, literary criticism focuses on what would be the critic's views on the literary works rather than what the author's intent on his or her own work. As what I have said, critics' job is to provide their analysis and interpretation by means of evaluating and making their discussion about the works. Though the creative and critical faculties are logically distinct, psychologically they are infused with each other. It is simply because creative and critical faculties are both used in dealing and interpretation that are based on the understanding of both critic and author. Basically, it has the same goal, which is to provide knowledge and emotion to the viewers or readers. There is a kind of criticism which exists before art itself, just as there is a kind of criticism which follows art, taking art as its subject matter. As literary works involve, arts play an important role in creating and analyzing literature because art have its own ability to interpret the literature by itself and it can easily show the meaning behind it. However, it always depends on how complex the work that it needs to have review from critics to explain and be able to ordinary readers understand the work. According to Scott James, there is no work of art. A lot of critics do not agree to this statement and provide their conclusion that a work of art which did not begin in emotion is not art. That art could be there and maybe not. And according to Grierson, both poet and critic draw beauty and the truth, and we may be glad of both, which shows the importance their fair and share of roles of within the literary works, the ones that create and the ones that beautify, and each will fall under being a good and better critic, ensuring that you manifest the same interest at heart as the artist possesses, and able yourself to speak and put your impression on behalf of artists. In conclusion, as what Alexander Pope said, both must alike from heaven derive their light, these born to judge as well as those to write. That when we relate it to being a critic and an author, it simply depicts fair and just judgment where you are to help and not to destroy one's intellectual literary works.
Literary criticism and scientific accuracy. There has been a debatable question which made the literary critics circle buzzing with clashing opinions and views. Is literary criticism an art or an exact science? Critics like I.A. Richards and Proof Moulton aim at scientific accuracy and scientific impartiality in their literary criticism. Richards thought that criticism should emulate the precision of exact science. He believes that making literature is scientifically analyzable activity. However, according to D.H. Lawrence, criticism can never be a science. In the first place, much too personal, and the second, it's concerned with values that science ignores. Meaning the literary criticism can be no more than a reasoned account of feeling produced upon the critic by the book he is criticizing. There are some critics, including Alexander Pope, who believe that criticism shares both characteristics, both as an art and science. In his book entitled An Essay on Criticism, wherein he said, "A perfect judge will read each work of wit with the same spirit that the authors read it," meaning the true critic must judge a work accordance with the writer's intention.